what's up guys? I'm Daniel Conroy, and I've never done any sort of video like this before. I've never put myself in front of a camera like this, but I figured now is an important time to do this about the issue that I'm going to talk about today. What this video intends to do is talk about the white nationalist alt-right movement, but in a video styled after what Hassan Piker likes to do his videos like this.
Okay, before we get started, I need to say something that needs to be said, and you're going to understand the context later in the piece. Nazis and white supremacists are terrorists, just like ISIS. And the people affiliated with them are also terrorists, just like ISIS. We lock up ISIS affiliates, as we should, so why do we treat Nazis and white supremacists differently? Well, here's why. Because they're white.
So, this may be a lesser and low-budget version. While he may have this expensive studio in LA where he has editors, I live a block away from 5 Points, and I'm gonna edit this on iMovie. So let's get started. I became fascinated and interested with this alt-right white nationalist movement, and I was intrigued of how this started and how people actually can join this movement. And how is this real, and how is this situation happening in 2017? Or what I realized is normalization of these Nazi sympathizers and the white nationalist movement is the real problem here. There's been two instances in the last 6 months, in a sense, just in this semester, that have really caught my attention into this sort of sympathizing with the Nazi side. And those two examples were, that was Trump in his speech after what had happened in Charlottesville, and recently the New York Times article on the boy next door who is a Nazi. The New York Times published an article on November 25th called "A Voice of Hate in America's Heartland," and it's about a white nationalist. Let me just read you some quotes from the article so you can get a better idea of what it's really about. Tony and Maria Hoviter were married this fall. They registered at Target. On their list was a muffin pan, a four-drawer dresser, and a pineapple slicer. That's great. He's still a Nazi. Miss Hoviter, 25, was worried about Antifa bashing up the ceremony. Weddings are hard enough to plan when your fiancé is not an avowed white nationalist. Meanwhile, this is the same guy that was in Charlottesville saying things like, "Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Blood and soil! 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 Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets!" So the New York Times is like, hey, he's just like all of us. It's no problem. Let's read one more quote. On a recent weekday evening, Mr. Hoviter was at home, sautéing minced garlic with chili flakes and waiting for his pasta to boil. The cats were wandering in and out of their tidy little rental house. Books about Mussolini and Hitler shared self-space with a stack of Nintendo Wii games. Jesus Christ. This was published by the New York Times in November of 2017. Holy shit, how is this happening? And I get how people can think that this article is helpful because it can show how Nazis have changed over the years and how they can just look like the boy next door. But if you're someone on the fringe of this white nationalist alt-right movement, then you see this published in the New York Times and you think, hey, maybe my ideas aren't so crazy. Another thing to note is that this movement is extremely male. It's filled with a bunch of young white guys, and it's toxic masculinity at its finest. It's what they do and how they act, and it's everything surrounding them. They have this perception of what women should be. They have their version of the quote-unquote American future, which, to be honest, looks a lot like the 1700s, in which women didn't have rights and white men ruled the world. If you look back at the University of Virginia and see who was marching, it was all young white men. These young white men have this crisis of manhood and this crisis of masculinity, and are joining these toxic hate groups in order to find an identity. And that's why the normalization of these things that are happening are so dangerous. You can see these young men lurking message boards who are on the fringe of this movement, who have these sort of beliefs, but there's just one thing that pushes them over the edge. And it's easy to see how these young white men join these kind of groups. The President of the United States talking about how there were bad people on both sides. And there's a New York Times article about a Nazi sympathizer. And if you think this is just a one-time thing or it's really not that big of a deal, think again. Here's the President of the United States normalizing these people.
And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now.
We're in a situation right now where people are getting backlash for criticizing and diminishing these Nazi ideologies, but yet these violent movements based on racism are gaining steam and being published by outlets like the New York Times and the United States government. Do people not realize that they believe in this racist ideology that white people are superior to all these other races and that they therefore should be dominant over these other races? Jeez. And I think Hassan Piker put it best when he said soon we'll be calling them senators or congressmen. Just for a quick second, I gotta go back to the article because this quote is just unbelievable. He said that while Nazi leader Heinrich Himmler wanted to exterminate groups like the Slavs and homosexuals, Hitler was a lot more kind of chill on those subjects. Hitler was chill. It's cool, guys. I did this video because I admire people who can put themselves out there and talk about issues that are extremely important. And that's what I want to do today. While you have no reason to believe what I'm talking about, I'm just a kid without a bachelor's degree right now. This is an extremely important issue that's happening in this country right now, and it needs to stop. So, thanks, guys.